Michael zipped his coat all the way to his chin, the collar rubbing stiffly against his stubble. His breath came out in thick clouds that quickly evaporated into the frigid air. The park, only a few months ago, a cheerful sprawl of green and laughter, was now a haunting, chilly quiet. The trees were bare, their branches rattling in the wind like the bones of some ancient creature. Beside him, his dog, Bruno, trudged along slowly, his fur thick with frost. Even the dog's enthusiasm seemed muted these days. No one could explain it. 7 or 8 months ago the sun had begun to cool, just like that. No warning, no nothing. The scientists never even saw it coming. Now the sun hung in the sky like a cold, pale eye, staring down at the earth. At first there had been panic. Scholars and professors and scientists and philosophers scrambled to explain what was happening, but they found no answers. Theories circulated wildly, a solar flare, some celestial anomaly, even the notion that the sun itself was evolving, transforming in ways no one could predict. Yet for all the headlines and debates, 2 things were certain. The world was freezing, and no one knew why. Michael watched Bruno sniff the ground near a bench, his muzzle speckled with ice and snow. The frost had taken hold of everything now. The grass, once vibrant, was a brittle mat of white, crunching underfoot. The air was so still it was oppressive, as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to give. He pulled his coat tighter, though it made little difference. Even with layer upon layer the cold seeped in, gnawing at his bones. The park, once bustling with joggers and children, was nearly deserted. A few lone figures moved in the distance, their outlines blurred by the grey haze that had replaced the sky. Michael used to come here often, back when the sun had been warm, when it painted the park in gold and the breeze was something to welcome. But now the sun was merely a ghost of its former self. Bruno growled softly, his ears pricking up. Michael followed his gaze and saw a man standing by the frozen pond, his back turned. He was tall, bundled in a heavy coat, a scarf wrapped around his neck, his breath visible in the cold air. Michael hadn't noticed him earlier, and the man's stillness was unnerving. Bruno let out a low whine and tugged at the leash. Michael shushed him and they continued on their path, but the man by the pond lingered in his mind. There was something about the way he stood. Not just the stillness, but a tension, like he was waiting for something, or someone. The wind picked up slightly, carrying a sound that Michael almost didn't register at first. It was faint, but persistent, like a distant whisper. He stopped in his tracks and listened, his breath fogging in the air. Bruno's ears twitched as if he heard it too. It wasn't words exactly, but a strange murmuring, as if the cold itself was speaking in some language Michael couldn't understand. He shuddered and shook his head, trying to shake the feeling. It was just the wind, nothing more. They walked on, the silence around them growing heavier. Michael's mind drifted back to the day the sun had changed. It had been gradual, almost imperceptible at first. The light looked the same, but there was less warmth. People had joked about it at first, saying they could finally enjoy the summer without sweating, but then the temperature began to drop. It became clear that this was no joke. Days passed, then weeks, and the cold tightened its grip. The world had become a strange, hostile place. Bruno barked suddenly, startling Michael out of his thoughts. The dog had stopped again, staring intently at something just ahead. Michael squinted, and in the dim light he saw another figure sitting on a bench, huddled against the cold. This one was different, smaller, frailer. As they got closer, Michael realized it was a woman, her face gaunt and pale, wrapped in a coat. Her eyes were fixed on the ground as if she hadn't noticed them approaching. "Cold out here, isn't it?" Michael said, trying to sound casual, though the air felt thick with unease. The woman looked up slowly, her eyes glassy, almost hollow. "Colder every day," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The sun's not the same." Michael nodded, unsure how to respond. Everyone knew the sun wasn't the same. There had been nothing else in the news for months, but there was no sense in talking about it like this, not here. Conversations on the topic were infinite and varied, and ultimately futile. They provided no answers and changed nothing. The cold desolation would continue regardless of what was said. The woman turned, her gaze drifting back to the ground. She shrugged almost imperceptibly and seemed to forget about Michael's presence. Suddenly, Bruno let out a low growl and Michael tightened his grip on the leash. The whispers returned, louder now, swirling around them like a breeze that wasn't there. Michael glanced around, his pulse quickening. The park seemed to be pressing in on him, the trees leaning closer, the branches cracking in the still air. The silence was magnified by the swirling whispers. "I should go," Michael said, his voice a little too loud as if to break the spell. The woman didn't respond. She just sat there, staring at the ground, her breath coming in shallow puffs of mist. As Michael walked away, the whispers faded, but the chill in his bones remained. Bruno walked beside him, his usual energy completely gone, as if the cold had sapped the life from him. The park, once a sanctuary, felt hostile now. The world itself was turning against them. When Michael glanced back over his shoulder, the woman was gone, the bench empty, the frozen trees looming overhead. Michael wondered if the woman had also heard the whispers in the wind. Bruno and Michael made their way out of the park. Frozen grass gave way to icy concrete and stone. Everything was hard and unforgiving. Then suddenly, more whispers, but this time more intense, like shouted whispers, if such a thing were possible. Instinctively, Michael and Bruno both looked up and ahead, man and dog together, drawn instinctively towards the direction of the whisper's source. They looked up into the relentless sky, and there, watching, hung the sun, watching the world it had once warmed slowly freeze over, as the whispers continued.